moment is here, you can stop your search. It's Comics by Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. I've got a viewer mail here, and it's threatening that it's a long one. It's not a long one though, but let's get into it. It says, "Hey Perch, I like your channel, and one point that I agree with is how making a comic too political means that people 10 plus years from now won't be able to relate the same way we can relate to 60s X-Men. But there's another dimension here, which I rarely see discussed, which is foreign markets. A comic that is too political in America and will be considered dated in 10 years is dated immediately, almost immediately outside the US. Comics get sold across Europe and elsewhere, especially in the UK, Ireland, Germany, Australia, South Africa, Canada, etc. A partisan political American comic is almost immediately dated here. I understand these writers may want to take a stand against Trump, Republicans, whoever, but when I read these books and have a more explicit message, I just think, who cares? He's literally not my president. I'm not saying that comics should be written non-American. I'm actually on the side of Superman should say the American way. Superheroes comics are quintessentially a piece of Americana. But when the writers make their comics anti-Trump, anti-GOP, what they're doing is not only alienating a fraction of American customers, they're making the stories instantly irrelevant for foreign audiences. I've seen you and others compare sales of different comics, but I've never seen anyone compare this by the American market versus the foreign market. I wouldn't be surprised if the, quote, woke comics undersell relative to less woke comics at a greater rate in the US. For example, I remember seeing the low mid-performing books like Hawkman and Justice League Dark on the new release shelves every week, but never have I seen a Vita Ayala book up there, excluding anthologies. Well, that's because it's selling out. No, sorry. I'm not telling Americans to shut up to please us, but just ask them to consider that we don't have much stake in products that are specific to American politics. It's a good point. So right now, if you're in the comic business, whatever you are, big company, small company, you have to be thinking about foreign markets. And I know that's a whole other kind of angry dialogue at times of people, doing too much to appeal to China or et cetera. But if you're going to fully maximize the book, and when we talk about, comics needs to have more money coming into it, creators need to be paid well. Well, one obvious source of revenue is to make comics that are, able to be sold overseas, translated, and put out there better. And what's interesting is comics from a production standpoint took a number of steps that in theory should have made it much easier to localize and translate and put things out there, but the process seems to have not really benefited. I was pretty shocked to learn that some of the localization that was going on at Marvel was still using the same process and way of doing it from 15, 20 years ago, as opposed to the fact that most of the art is coming in digitally now, and in theory you could cross-localize very, very quickly by having the material, done simultaneously. You could do that, and it wouldn't be that terribly difficult to do. Other businesses are doing it. But anyway, be that as it may, I think the point is a good one. The trick is that in many cases, politics outside the U.S., and I would ask for people who may be kind of scratching their chins thinking about this, do you read manga? If you read manga, have you noticed that sometimes you get shots of Obe or you get different political figures that show up in the manga? It does happen. Again, it's a myth that says that manga avoids politics completely, but it does downplay, it does handle it differently. But every now and then, you get a current Japanese political figure, or sometimes even not a political figure, just a Japanese celebrity in manga. Same thing with manhwa, by the way. The thing is, though, you probably had no idea who that was, and even if there was a little caption that told you, it had no context. It seemed just kind of, okay, here's this person. And there's been manga that have kind of overemphasized on, celebrity baseball players or celebrity chefs. I remember, and this is going back now, at least 25 years, I would say. It goes back a ways. There was the original Iron Chef show that was out in Japan. And it got translated over here on the Food Network and all the rest. And then American audiences got now it's got a whole American-based show. So if you're here, Iron Chef, and you're thinking, you've only seen things that have been created in the last 15 years or so, you haven't really seen kind of this original thing. But there was some manga that would put in some of those, characters like Chen-san or I'm trying to think of some of the others, but they would put in some of the Iron Chefs into the comic and into the manga, and it would make no sense. again, you had no context, it made no sense. But if the story built around a lot of it, they assumed that you knew certain aspects of what was going on in the culture there. The stories usually suffered from it. It didn't make much sense, and it felt like they were overemphasizing on these figures that didn't matter. When you get into politics and you do the same thing overseas, it makes the problem even worse because there's a lot of, not only are you introducing a theme and characters in a topic, i.e., politics, you're also generally introducing a point of view that is really, really strange. If, for example, and this isn't the best one, but if you had that Spider-Gwen annual where you had Trump as MODOK, and that's suddenly going over to France, people might recognize Trump there because Trump was a globally recognizable figure, but it would feel very bizarre. It would feel even more bizarre than the people who were reading it in the U.S. You would not understand the subtext of the creators taking a shot at this president. It would just look like this weird insertion of a political figure into this story that had no bearing or no context. It does turn people off, and there are a lot of evidence of how stories that you said how to quote woke stories. The problem with woke as a term is that it's a very, very broad term, and you can there's certainly been I don't know, depending on how you apply it. Superman smashes the Klan did well overseas. Some call it a woke book. I think that's an inaccurate read of that title. I think that if you're calling Superman Smashes the Klan woke, I think you are you're really you probably haven't read it, and you are keying off of the fact that there's a dialogue right now about white nationalism and Klan, and so you're making that assumption. But the book itself is based off of an old radio play, so it doesn't. I don't think that fits. But that title did very well. And why it did very well is not a particular surprise. Even though it was using American historical themes, i.e. the Klan, it was very clear that there were bad guys. It was very clear what Superman was trying to do. It was very clear what the heroism was in that story. It wasn't tied up in, the Klan's member is actually a member of the GOP who is voting against the budget reconciliation bill and therefore trying to starve out infrastructure of marginalized communities. And there's not, I mean, it's like, hey, here's a bad guy terrorizing some kids. Superman takes care of it. That is pretty universal. I think it's not just being specific. It's any point of view that references stuff that is very regionalized. And here's by the way, here's the part that always drives me the most nuts about all of this and this is, I'll tell you a story. I think I've said it here on the show, and if you've heard, when Sean and I had a good conversation about this, that I'm left leaning historically. However, that doesn't mean what it used to mean. If you're talking about being, left leaning, living in, say, Colorado in the 80s and in the early 90s, if you're left leaning in Colorado, that is, you are far right in Portland in 2021. That's how it's changed. It used to be very common, 20 years ago, maybe 20, 30. I remember during the Clinton years and the Bush years, a pretty common political lean was, socially, I lean left. Economically, I lean right. That was a pretty common statement. A lot of people in tech felt that way. A lot of people just out doing business were that way. It's basically saying, hey, issue at the time, gay marriage. Yeah, it's not my concern. I think gay people should be able to be married. But I also think that our government should spend our money wisely and not just toss it around and invest in a bunch of programs that have dubious meanings. I don't want to get us involved in a bunch of renaming activities. I don't want to start to deny history because it's uncomfortable for some people. But that's what that leaning left used to mean. It means, hey, we support our police, but of course we also want accountability for their actions. We don't want police to, you don't want corruption. So we want to have a healthy oversight of the police, but we also support people who are out there who are brave and doing their job. We don't assume that somebody who puts on a badge is automatically an evil person. Again, this used to mean leaning left. I recognize in 2021 it does not. But almost everything I just said is pretty again, pretty universal. Those values tended to translate when you went out of the U.S. Uh, this is what is surprising to me, and where I think I have, in many ways, the litmus test is of myself and kind of how I rank up with other people. Is I love travel. I like to go to other countries. When I go to other countries, I am incredibly respectful of their culture. It's their rules. It's their land. I'm not going to go over there and try and change things. In fact, I want to go over there and learn. I have made this comment before. I think if it used to be bringing diversity into the workplace. What was one of the big values of diversity in the workplace? You got point of views that were not your own, which would make the company typically stronger. You got life experiences. You had different adventures, different ways of doing business that are that make your product more powerful, make your company more money. And diversity can mean a white guy on the West Coast. It could mean that a white guy on the East Coast. It could mean a black guy from the Northeast. It can mean a Latino person, Hispanic person from the Southwest. It can mean all different things. It could be race, it could be gender, it could be sexuality, it could be location, it could be age. There's a lot of different aspects to diversity. And if you comprise a team or a group of all of the exact same demographic, you tend to get blinders on. That was a value. And that was not really a controversial statement back in the 90s. One of the ways you did that is you traveled. And so you may say, wow, he got pretty far afield here. No, but what I see today is a lot of people who have never traveled. And they have these assumptions about what the other world is like, what Europe is like, what South America is like, what Africa is like, what Asia is like. They have all these assumptions. And in many cases, they will talk with complete authority about those places and what they're like and the cultures, the heritage, and what that group wants, what that group needs. They need this. And what it reminds me of is a lot of the people who were my friends who were on the right, who were big conservatives back in the late 80s, early 90s. That was a group who tended to be very insular, didn't travel. Like, I know my neighborhood, and I'm not going outside my neighborhood. I don't eat that foreign food. Mexican food is scary. I'm going to eat good old American food. American food. That used to be that group. What I've seen change is that increasingly it's everywhere, but I see more and more people from the left who never travel, and instead their view of I just choked on my food. I was talking to somebody and they're like, oh, I love Asian food. I've always loved Asian food. I eat at Panda Express at least once a week. Okay, that's not Asian food. That is fast food. It's garbage, and just stop with all that. That's not. If you like it, great. I have no issues if you like it. Just like if you like Arby's, good for you. Well, sort of, but okay, good for you. But you can't claim to be an expert on Asian food and cite your wealth of experience on Panda Express. That shows a heavy amount of ignorance. Go travel, go learn. And so when I see a lot of these comic books that throw in, American-based politics and other things, and often they do that under the guise of diversity and inclusion, but they're anything but that. It's not diverse. It's not inclusive. It does not take into account other regions. But the people are absolutely convinced that it does. That's the baffling part. They are 100% of the belief that they are writing a more global, inclusive story, when in reality, it is unrecognizable and unpenetrable by that global community. The only people who are going to get it are the very small bubble group of the person writing. And it's a weird flip. It's been very strange, and you could laugh if you want, but it's been very weird to watch the little political goalposts move around, particularly over the last 15 years, and really of the last 5 to 10. It's been very, very strange. And I do have a lot of I hope that this generation, the people in their 20s, there has to be a wake up moment for a lot of those folks of You got to get out there. You got to see the world. And maybe you actually ought to do what you're always telling everybody to do. Shut up, listen, observe, go and be educated, be taught. Don't wander in there with your point of view and just start barking at people. Because I traveled with many people for work and other places. I'll tell you, the most embarrassed I've ever been going to some of these countries is when I go with that age group who wanders in and then immediately starts kind of barking how the culture should behave. And they're doing so not from a bigoted perspective. Well, I mean, it ultimately is, but they're doing it from I am inclusive. Now let me tell you what to do. It's madness. But definitely, to the original question, yeah, these comics internationally, when they're written this way, are not going to do well. It needs to be more universal. Doesn't mean you can't comment on any of this stuff. Of course, you can do whatever you want, but you should remember that your audience is not in the same bubble you are. It's not as plugged in. So, write accordingly. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. Sorry for the little detour there, but maybe you appreciate that context. I don't know. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, comments below, and thanks for listening.